Good morning, everybody. My name is Matthew Savage. I'm the Strata Operations Manager at BCsystems, and I'll be your guide for this morning. So thanks for joining our BCsystems webinar for caretakers / building managers / onsite manager, however you're described in your own community. So it's just gone 10 o'clock or 10:01, so there's a few attendees still trickling into the meeting. But we'll get going anyway. So we've got a smaller group than usual this morning. We usually do these webinars with committee members or all unit owners. So obviously when we're dealing with caretakers, building managers, it's a smaller community. There's only one in each building, which means we've got more opportunity to answer questions more specifically. And all of the attendees in this meeting today are working in this role or owners of management rights. So if you've got a question, I'm more than happy to answer it today. I've got some prepared information which we think might be hopefully useful to you. But if you've got, as I said, if you've got questions as we go, pop them in the questions or the chat interface on your screen, and we should have some time at the end to answer them. And happy if you've got a specific question, just give me enough information that I can come up with some advice for you. So this is the first webinar we've done specifically for managers, caretakers, building managers. A lot of the attendees are existing BCsystems clients, which is great, but we've also got a mix. So there's about half and half. So half the people on the call have had this information shared with them by somebody else. So I'll be talking generally, and it applies, of course, whether you're a BCsystems customer or not. For those who don't know us, we've been in business for 30 years. I haven't been here that whole time, but Kerry Anthon, who started the business, is a very respected person in the industry and has been very involved with ARAMA in the past and other management rights organisations, and was one of the early members of SCA Queensland. So she's a big industry advocate, and our business BCsystems really was manager driven. So when I joined about 3 years ago, about 98% of our buildings had management rights, so pretty much all of them, which is very different to the average mix in most businesses. So most strata management businesses would have a large portion of their portfolio being smaller buildings that make up the volume, and that have a couple of big buildings with caretaking management rights. So a lot of people are experienced with it, but it may not be their normal day-to-day working environment, whereas for our team, management rights is really just our bread and butter. So we have hopefully some insights to share with you, and if you take away one thing from today, then I think that's job well done. So looks like everybody's in now, so we'll get going, and keep those questions coming in the chat or the questions, and I'll get to them. So today, the thrust is really helping you work with your committees in the most effective way. And, for those who have been in the business for more than, 3 or 5 years, I suppose, you'll see committees change quite regularly, and one committee member can come into your committee and change the dynamic completely. So even though you've got 7 members, if one of them changes, it doesn't mean the other 6 stay the same. You can have a pretty dramatic shift in the approach by the committee just on the back of one person. So managing that committee relationship is really make or break in your business. It's the same in our business. And so we deal with the same pressures when we come to committees. And that's where we're hopefully able to share some insight, because we're working with, hundreds of committees, and you're usually working with one. So hopefully we can look for some trends and things we can do about it. Okay, so first thing on individual committee members, can you name them all? So this sounds like a silly question, because if they're active, then yeah, I'm sure you can. If they come to the committee meetings and you sit and talk, around the pool area with them for hours about, what types of plants they like in the garden bed, then you're probably going to know those people's names quite well. However, a lot of your buildings will have committee members who you've never seen before, They might be investors who just don't come to meetings, but chime in by email, or they could be the committee members or owners who sort of just automatically tick that they'd like to be a member of the committee each AGM and then don't participate through the year. So out of our clients, on an average building, I'd say there's probably 2 out of the 7 committee members are very rarely interactive with us or with the building manager. And those people are interesting because if they're not active, you don't have the opportunity to build a rapport with them. And we sometimes sit at committee meetings and we go through the attendee list and say, oh, Susan's not here. Has anyone ever seen her before? No. Do we know who she is? No. So there can be a challenge in getting to know your committee members. I'd suggest if you do have a committee member like that, give them some special attention. They've obviously indicated that they want to be on the committee either that year or each year, and they might just be waiting for an opportunity to contribute. They may not know how to do that. So if you've got committee members that you don't have a regular contact with, I would suggest you get their contact information from us, from your body corporate manager, and give them a call and just introduce yourself, and that helps makes all the other things that you need to do with that committee a little bit easier. And that interaction might be enough to get them involved, and you might end up with a bit of an ally in the site that you didn't have before. So how long have these committee members owned in the building? I think that's relevant for caretaking disputes particularly. So if we look at, if a building's working well, great. If a building's not working well, that's where we start to look at these issues and what we think is contributing to the problems. Committee members that have a very long memory can be quite challenging to work with. So if you've got a committee member that's been there for 20 years and they've worked with 5 building managers or 10 building managers before you, then they're comparing you to a lot of other performers. And a lot of the time, committee members have this sort of nostalgia for the past, and they're remembering how the building operated and the gardens looked, spectacular, and there were no problems, and the building manager wasn't constantly trying to get them to spend money. But they're probably remembering when the building was 2-3 years old, and there's a big difference between a 2-year-old building and a 25-year-old building. So if you've got a committee member like that, that doesn't, knowing that information doesn't change their view, but I think it would give you the opportunity to raise those issues sort of every time you have a maintenance issue. So it could be the difference between just giving them quotes to approve or pointing out to them, hey, look, this particular system in the building has been working fine for 20 years. Yes, it needs to be replaced now and it's going to cost $10,000. But if you look at the lifespan we've had out of this over the last 20 years, where it's had minimal repairs and it's done a pretty good job, we can't blame it for failing now, and it's normal for buildings to need this type of work. So overcoming that sort of the nostalgia is something that is easier done if you know that you've got committee members who are remembering that far back. And remembering the building when it was new, if cleaning issues, I don't know, if you've got a building with tiles and you clean them and you could be the absolute best cleaner in the world, after 25 years of sitting out in the weather, they're just not going to look the same as when they were new. So that doesn't mean you're negligent in your cleaning, but there's just some realities of life that people need to come to terms with. Conversely, if you have a lot of new committee members and they've only bought in the last 2-3 years, what are their motivations? Were they buying that property thinking, oh, these pool tiles look terrible and I think we could spend some sinking fund money on them and get a quick result and make the place look a lot better, and that might give them an instant capital benefit. So they bought their property and the common property looked pretty old and tired. They can spend the sinking fund money, which was sitting in the bank, and make that pool area look, really awesome. And then their property is instantly worth more, and so is everybody else's. So that can be a different dynamic where they come in and they want to make it look different straight away. And you might be thinking, well, these tiles are doing fine, they're well maintained and there's nothing wrong with them, they're just old. So understanding how long the committee members have been owners in the building for is important, as well as how long they've been on the committee for. If they've just joined the committee, so if they've been an owner for a long time and they've just joined the committee, is there something in particular that they want to achieve? So that's assuming that they haven't wanted to join the committee before and all of a sudden they've shown interest. That's often a sign that something's about to change. So they've either gotten really annoyed with something and they want to do something about it, or they come on with an agenda. So they really want the building to get painted. They're going to join the committee. That's their only focus. They're not interested in gardens. They're not interested in, you know, any other issues. They're the painting committee member. They want to get the place painted. When they achieve that goal, they often drop off the committee and you never hear from them again. So there are those committee members that get activated or triggered by a specific issue. Sometimes that is just dissatisfaction with the caretaking, and that's a difficult committee member to deal with. You know, that's the most difficult type. But if they come on with a genuine interest, then working with them, letting them sort of flex their muscles in that area can be quite productive. Because often if they come on with that intention, they are prepared to spend some time and effort, you know, doing work that you otherwise might need to do yourself. Alternatively, you know, have they just retired, or are they relocating closer to the property? Is it an investment property that they plan on moving into for their retirement? So they're joining the committee now to sort of get a year or two head start. So having that knowledge will just help you, you know, work with their personalities and their preferences. And we don't know that information often. We can tell you how long they've owned and if they've been on the committee before based on minutes. But the best way to get to that is just ring them and ask them, you know, introduce yourself, have a bit of background chat, and see what you can get out of them. With investors as well, it's easy to put them in the investment camp, but a lot of investors we speak to on committees have bought a property. It's an investment property for 10 years, but they do plan on moving to the Gold Coast and living in it, or they plan on having their son move into it when he comes back to Australia. So those people are slightly different to the average investor, where it's just an economic investment and they don't care about it if it makes money. There are some investors who care as much as an owner-occupier does, even though they're not living it themselves. This next slide is based on feedback from our own team. So we didn't poll people because I think the result of a poll of clients would probably be skewed by giving the answer they think they should give rather than the answer that they believe. But these are, so, our team, we've got 10 strata managers. They're all very experienced. We've had managers with us, more than 10 years working with some of these same buildings over that whole time. So it is based on our own impression. But if you look at the difference between investors and owner occupiers, we all know and would say to each other, look, there's a big difference in what they're looking for. But it's interesting to me to put it into a pie chart and just look at it visually. So on the left, we've got investors. I'd say half of their effort, at least, or half of their thinking time in the building is on their rental return. So primarily, it's a place that it's a thing they've purchased to get a return. So ultimately, if you bought shares or you bought, bonds or something else that was a financial investment, you're mostly interested in getting a monetary benefit from it. All of the other features and benefits of that asset are largely secondary. So if we look at that investment pie chart and say half of their effort goes on just rental return, then the other half is divided among, the other sort of pillar areas. So the manager's reporting, how much do they know about the site? How much do they care about it really? The process for quotes and repairs, and often that's focused on getting the best value for money because it's ultimately a financial investment for them. The caretaking physical duties are important to investors, but they're not more important than some of the other things on average. And then bylaw compliance is very unimportant to investors because usually bylaw compliance, like people having loud parties, doesn't bother them because they don't live there. It doesn't cause any damage to the property. so it's not actually impacting their financial investment at the site, and it's a problem that can usually be solved with words and doesn't require their effort in the most part. So that's how we would sort of describe an investor. An owner-occupier, on the right-hand side, completely different. So physical duties would occupy, I think here's like 66% of the pie chart. So nearly all of their effort or their involvement is on the physical duties, which makes sense because that's what they can see. So if you drive into your driveway every night and there's weeds in the garden, it's very difficult to think about anything other than those weeds when you go out and talk to the caretaker in the morning. So that's just human nature. What's in front of your eyes is always the most important thing. So physical duties for them, really important. The bylaws are also really important because there's, owner-occupiers are suffering the consequence of people breaching the bylaws. So if someone's parking in the visitor parking, their visitors can't park there, or the noise is keeping them up at night. So bylaws would be sort of at least the second biggest chunk of their activity. Reporting for owner-occupiers, I'd say is probably pretty small because they can see things and they live there, so they don't really need reporting from the caretaker manager as much as you might think. And then quotes and repairs, less important. They treat it more like how they would deal with their own property because it's something they can see, and if they get a quote, they can go and look at the site and compare the quote with what they can see on the ground. So it's less about the economics of quotes and repairs and more about the suitability of, what has been quoted. Is it the exact same type of pool fence that they've got now? Will it look different? An investor doesn't care about that, an owner-occupier does. So obviously I should say this is all very generalized, but if you look at 1,000 committee members and split them into these two camps, I think it would look pretty close to these graphs. Committee group dynamics. Now these words are just my words, but I think they probably do a good job of describing some of the personality types we see in committees. So there's a ringleader is the dominant committee member, often end up being the chairperson or secretary because they might be quite a dominant personality type and want to take those positions. Alternatively, they could be a different committee member and just have a really strong opinion. So getting a ringleader committee member on board means the others are much more likely to follow that committee member, either because they think that committee member has put in more effort because they communicate their opinion so strongly, or they assume that they are like an expert in the question being asked because they come back so strongly, or simply they might be feared. So it might be a case of, look, I don't care what colour the pool fence is, but John really wants it to be grey and I don't want to have a fight with John. I can't be bothered, so I'm going to let him get his way. So that means John's way is the winning way because everybody else just can't be bothered to have an argument, or they're not as invested as that ringleader committee member. So getting them on board is important, and often they can, because they're such a dominant opinionated personality type, they often can be difficult to get on board. But if you can put effort in and get them on board, work out what their priorities are, they can be a real asset to a caretaker manager. The contrarian committee member doesn't agree to anything. They don't like the first option no matter what it is, and they've always got a different opinion to everybody else. So sometimes these people come on and they just don't like the other committee members, so they sort of act a bit more difficultly. Some sort of contrarian committee members, we hear that some committee members don't like when the committee always agrees on everything unanimously. So, if you look at your own committee meeting minutes, chances are, if you've got 7 committee members, everything will say 7 yes votes, 7 yes votes, 7 yes votes. And some contrarians don't like that because it looks like the committee's not functioning with proper debate and disagreement. So sometimes they throw in some disagreement just so that there's some disagreement to talk about. Sometimes these people aren't actually that committed to what they're saying. They just want other people to think in a different way, which can be quite healthy for a committee discussion. Pessimist, these people can just get stuck on the negative consequences. So the example, one pipe leaks, and you get a quote to repair it. Everybody says yes. This person says, oh, what about all the other pipes? Should we check all the other pipes in case they leak? The plumbing system's terrible. Should we go back to the developer? Should we ring the council? Like, these people have a focus on the negative consequences, when in most cases you see a problem, you fix it, and in a big complex that's big enough to have a management rights at it, problems like a pipe leak happen all the time, and if they don't understand that it's just a part of life, they can think the worst case scenario when anything comes up. Pack member, this is just like a committee member numbers game. Often a pack member waits to see what the others do before giving an opinion. You'll often note these people never respond first to any suggestion, particularly if you say, here's 3 colours for the pool fence, which one do you like? A pack member who wants to please doesn't jump in first. They sort of wait until the more dominant members give their opinion, and they say, I'm happy to go with whatever the majority thinks. These people can be quite difficult if you get a whole committee of pack members, because if everybody wants to go with the flow, then there is actually no direction and nothing gets achieved. So you do need some leadership from the committee. Otherwise, it just sort of goes around in a circle and no one takes any responsibility for throwing out their opinion. And then the last type I've got is missing in action. So these people just, you don't know who they are, they never respond to anything, and they're not very useful in a committee group where you need a majority of the committee to make decisions. If you've got 7 members and 2 of them don't respond ever, then you really need to get the other 4 or 5 to respond to absolutely every decision. Otherwise, you don't have the numbers to get something through. So if you've got a committee member who's missing in action and they don't come to committee meetings, there is a mechanism for those committee members to get kicked off the committee automatically. If they don't come to 2 committee meetings in a row, they just get kicked off. Alternatively, you could suggest to them, hey, if you're really busy at the moment because your work's changed or something, why don't you resign from the committee and come back on next year? So it can be a way of getting rid of people that aren't contributing in a quick enough manner to the group. Okay, focus areas. These are from the pie chart. So physical duties, everybody knows what these are. They're the things that you do with your labour. So gardens, cleaning, pool, whatever it is at your site that people can see and people care about. Physically, that's just in my physical duties camp. Quotes and maintenance, this is really where people have focused on a lot of conflict and ethics perceptions around quotes. And this requires a lot of effort to get right. I think it's something that, if it's not done well, can cause a lot of problems for the body corporate community, and a lot of those can be quite long lasting. Bylaws, people always like rules to be followed. A lot of committee members have a do what I say and not what I do approach, and it would not be uncommon for committee members to also have a couple of bylaw violations that, interestingly, they're not so focused on, but other people get a lot of focus. And bylaws are something that, you can't solve because people just do what they want and often breach the rules, but there is a way you can manage it without causing a lot of stress and work for yourself and for the committee. And then reporting, what's too much versus too little, and avoiding email overload. So I'll go into a couple of these and how we see this working, not working. Physical duties, customer expectations will always change over time. This is the same for our business and any business. If you think you can do something the same way for 20 years and everybody's going to be equally happy with it, then you're crazy. So customer expectations changing is not something to resist. I think it's something to work with. And in a building, if you're on a 20-year-old agreement or longer, as in not 20 years remaining, but the original thing was written in the 1990s, then it may not be applicable to the needs of the building now. So if you have that sort of friction where people want you to do something over here and you're doing something different because that's what the contract requires, I would say have a reasonable discussion about looking at what needs to change in there, and do you need to adjust your duties and contract to suit the new dynamic at the scheme. And a lot of committee members will go for that. It's something they often don't suggest, but it's definitely something that you as a manager can suggest. Excuse me. So that, that sort of ties into my next point. Be flexible, work with your committees on duties planning. We see a lot of buildings that have duties that aren't necessary, and those are technically, or they're in theory, part of your remuneration, but they don't need to be done. So if you've got some duties like that, take them out and replace them with something that the community needs, and that can make everybody satisfied with the outcome there and resolve a lot of issues before they come up. Think about committee focused pie chart. So those two pie charts I put up, think about that when you're planning your spending. If you've got a group of investors, you want to spend that money on things that are going to generate rental return, and not just visual things, putting nice flowers in the garden bed. Tenants often don't care about that. It doesn't affect the rental returns, and investors therefore aren't interested. So that's something that should be front of mind when you're thinking about what you suggest the body corporate does in the next 12 months. Often that's manager duties is just a scale of cost versus outcome. Sometimes there's a gap in knowledge that we see between either the manager or the committee. They just don't understand what the duties are or what's involved in them. But often the duties can be improved if more effort is put, so more cost effort, you spend more on subcontracting, or you put more time into it, and that often gives a better outcome. So think about if it's a lack of understanding, a genuine lack of understanding from the committee, which might be something like the outcome is mediation or education, versus if they are, just expecting the mowing to be done weekly instead of fortnightly. And then that is a matter of cost for you, and where does it fall into your agreement? And what's the cost of not doing something? Will it cost you the relationship? So if there's something that's not strictly in your agreement, but you've got 40 owners who care about it and they want you to do it, if it costs you $1,000 a year on top of your outgoings, but it guarantees that you'll get all your top-ups approved, and if you put a gallery V up, that'll get approved, and whatever else you need will go through because owners are, you're delivering this added value. What's the cost of not doing something versus if you do it? And I'm not suggesting you just do whatever the committee tells you, but you could be strategic about a couple of things that aren't in your agreement, and they're sort of like value added services. And if you do that, I should say, you need to make a point of it. Don't do it in the background. It'd be totally fine to put forward, and building managers do this every meeting. They say, oh, by the way, we're not technically required to do cleaning of your outdoor furniture in the common property, but I happen to have this machine at home, and so I do it every month. And that generates some thank yous and a lot of goodwill, and doesn't ultimately cost that manager anything. Some things we say to committees when we're talking about duties, a lot of people complain about duties. I'm sure you know about that. We say a great manager, if you're working well with the manager, you don't need a duty schedule. So the buildings where the manager and the committee are working in sync, you could take the contract and rip it in half, and the manager won't go off the rails and the committee won't go off the rails. They'll still work as a duo well, and the manager knows what needs to be done. The committee has reasonable expectations. So the problem in these relationships usually isn't actually the duty schedule. It's that there's just a mismatch between the two people's priorities or expectations. Everything can be negotiated. So if the committee really wants something done, they can negotiate on it, but they usually can't force it. And so the best results always achieved through collaboration. We say that to committees. Whether that results in outcomes is not a guarantee, but I think we all agree that you're better off having a discussion and a disagreement politely with committees rather than each person getting lawyers and having a fight about it. Because if you've had a fight, even if you get your way, it leaves battle scars, and that does long-term damage to relationships with owners. You don't want to be that caretaker that, you know, sued the body corporate over the cleaning of the upholstery, because even if you're in the right, owners ultimately have that voting power, and you can't see through their decision-making process. So you never know what the impact is of your decision until you take it. Reporting. So we recommend monthly reports for managers to committees. I'd say probably about 10% of managers provide reports, which is a small number. I think that could be a lot higher. It's not required in most agreements or in many agreements, but it's something that we think is pretty simple. You're doing it anyway by emailing and putting things together. It's just often not called a report, and it's not sent through regularly. So I'd say if you can get some of your work into a reporting format, it might actually make it easier for you and give the committee some repetition and some pattern behaviour, which might actually deliver some quicker outcomes. If you're reporting, keep it simple. Don't write an essay. You know, make it really clear and easy to understand. And if there's nothing super important to report about, then that's probably good news. Like, nothing's gone wrong lately, so I'd report that good news as well. And that the more times you report good news, you know, it gives owners a sense of confidence that the place is well managed. Treat your report as a committee to-do list. So a lot of managers we work with will send something through, the committee ignores them, or they've, you know, you get one response and the others have forgotten about it, and then it doesn't get followed up. Now, we don't follow up managers' requests usually. If it's on a committee meeting agenda, then we sort of naturally follow it up because we put it on the next agenda. Excuse me. But if it's something that you think is important, you send it to the committee and they don't come back to you, you know, follow them up, because, you know, they're your client, and don't be afraid to do that. I've never heard of a committee complaining the manager's too pushy. In the last 15 years, I have never had a committee claim the manager's too pushy. It's always the other way, like the manager doesn't communicate. And so if you're thinking, oh, should I follow them up or not, I'd say always follow up. And you can tell them, you know, it's really important you get back to me because this is how I do my job. I can't do this without you. So put more of a pressure on them to come back to you. Don't be afraid of exercising a bit of, you know, pushiness strategically. Committee is ultimately your client. You know, chase them up for feedback if you need it about yourself as well. So don't be afraid of asking for feedback, and ask the committee what they want to see in your report. If you're asking for feedback and you think it will be negative, I'd say ask for it anyway, because that gives you the opportunity to address it. If there's negative feedback in the committee about your work, whether it's justified or not, that is going to owners in the background. So you're better off having it in the light so you can address it openly, rather than have people who, you know, maybe they just don't like your haircut. You don't want those people gradually eroding your support in the background. You want to get that out in the open so you can say, well, you've said I don't, you know, clean the pool nicely, but that's actually not in my duties, and I'm happy to make it better, but you need to pay twice as much to the pool contractor. So there might just be a simple misunderstanding that can have the air cleared. A lot of committee members don't ask a lot of questions. They might bring, which is again human nature, they might bring their experience from a different building into your building and assume that you'll do the same thing that the previous manager did, when those two buildings might be quite different. We think a basic report will take less than an hour per month to complete. So it's something I think you'd fill in as you go, use it as your sort of task tracker, and then just send it to the committee every sort of, you know, end of each month or something like that. So what to include in a report? I'd categorize these so they're really obvious. So quotes, committee direction required, put this first. This is what you want them to respond about. The rest of it is just FYI for them, ultimately. But here you want them to respond. So make it really clear. Don't make it in the form of a poem or, you know, a long sentence. Just say, you know, this is the thing and this is the answer I need, option A or B. I'd also suggest you report on what spending you've done under your delegation, whether that's engaging contractors or direct spending that you'll be reimbursed for, because a lot of committees get funny about that if they don't know about it in advance. It doesn't harm you to report on what you've spent regularly. It just takes away the question and answer process later. What you've completed in terms of maintenance. So if you hammered in 100 fence palings in the last month, put it in the report. So it shows what work you're doing, and committee members often don't see the work you're doing. They just see the outcome. So if you've put in a huge amount of effort, even if that hasn't generated a fantastic outcome, which might be beyond your control, at least they'll thank you for the effort. If you don't tell them about the effort, they only can look at the outcome and be dissatisfied with that. Then I'd give upcoming maintenance. So I think this is done well in a calendar type format. So just, boxes with January, February, March, April, May, and just put in there, the backflows due in January, the fires done in April and October. So whatever those schedules are, disclose that in each report coming up. It reduces a lot of questions and it helps the committee and you to both sort of understand timelines and when you might see quotes for something. And if they do get a quote in October, it's urgent now. They can't leave it 3 months to decide. So that upcoming maintenance is a big complaints area by committees. They don't know when things are done. Even if they are done well and on time, committees often still complain that they didn't know it was happening. So just tell them. Repeated bylaw issues. This is something that's really labour intensive for you, for the committee, for us. Bylaw breaching from the committee is quite complicated. It requires a committee decision, so a proper committee meeting or a VOC, a vote outside of a committee meeting. It goes to all owners. It's not cheap. It also needs 2 committee signatures on the form, which is difficult to get if they're not in the same location, and takes a long time. So we don't want to get those every 3 days by email. I'd say, save those up unless they're really urgent and give it to the committee in a group at the end of each month so they can deal with them and get some efficiency in that process. And then ask your committee, what else do they want to know? Do they really want to see the results of the pool water testing in the report? If so, put it in. We've actually got a bit of a template on this that I'm happy to share with the attendees today. We just came up with it ourselves and it's not overly complicated, but if you're looking for a way to set it out, this is sort of something we've come up with and we can share. Quotes. Okay, so when you're getting quotes for things and presenting them, number one, always disclose any conflict. And I've got this on a slide coming up, but if you use your friend's company for something, or you might have a business that you do on the side for something that the body corporate needs, totally fine to use related people, but if it's not disclosed, it will blow up at some stage. So always overly disclose any conflict and point out the benefits, like this is my brother's business and he has given us a great price. Most people are quite happy with that. They just want to know about it at the earliest possible time. Hold quotes until they're ready to present. So don't send through quotes as you get them. I would suggest, unless it's really critically urgent, just hold them until you're comfortable that they do the job and you can give them some comparison effort. And then analyze them as they come back. So quotes, if they're like for like, great. If they're not, why are they different? Is one contractor doing a better job? Is the scope you originally asked for not appropriate and someone's pointed that out to you and quoted differently? Anticipate those committee questions and just ask them straight away. And then prepare a summary and give a recommendation. So this is all fairly basic, I would say, but if it's not done, it can turn, 15-minute exercise putting this little table together into 3 hours of back and forth emails and then a committee meeting about it. So this is just something I've completely made up with fake contractors and everything, but I give a bit of a summary of what the issue was. For those committee members who don't know, if you're presenting a pool fence quote that says repair the pool fence, they'll say, well, what's wrong with it? So give them a bit of background. It doesn't need to be complicated, but, you know, do something, and, you know, put a picture in if that's helpful. I'd comment, if you can, on the sinking fund allocation. You'd have a copy of that report. If you tell them it's in the sinking fund forecast, it's almost like a green light to spend it, and it reduces a lot of that question about the cost. And then, you know, I'd point out as well who you approached for quotes. So if you've only got 2 quotes but you asked for 10, you know, that's different to if you only asked for 2 and you got 1. So show how much work you've put in the quote requesting phase. And if you presented this to the committee in the way I've sort of made it up here, I think you would quite easily get committee approval to go with your recommendation. And you probably wouldn't get any questions. Alternatively, if you just got these 3 quotes and you sent them through just as PDFs, you would have tons of questions from the committee. Okay, bylaw matters. So I don't want to go into too much detail. We do have a guide on bylaw enforcement for caretakers on our website. So committees have often a different expectation to what you might have for bylaw enforcement. And there are things you can do that have the appearance and the effect of bylaw enforcement without actually using the word enforcement in its sort of legal meaning. So you would all know you can't issue bylaw breach notices from the body corporate to residents. You can, however, you know, put notes under doors or text people saying, hey, your party was too loud. You can give them written warnings, and you can send breaches to your tenants if they're a managed property, and none of that counts as a restricted issue for you. So there is a guide on that, which I'd suggest you look at if that's a problem in your site. I tell the committee about ongoing issues and repeat offenders. The committee does not want to hear about every single time a dog barks, but if you've got a dog that's barking, you know, day in, day out, then yeah, they want to know about it. And usually your contract will have something in about like monitor observance or notify residents, and that's what committees look at. They don't necessarily recognise that distinction that you can only do the first couple of steps in the process and then it hands over to the committee. A lot of committees will expect the manager to deal with all behavioural issues at the site completely. But if you say, look, this is what I've got in my powers, I've got these first 3 notices and I did them on these dates, then it really shows that you've done what you can, and it now has to get escalated to the next level. And that can be done easily in the form of a report with just a simple table. All right, committee meetings. A lot of work happens at these, if they happen. A lot of buildings I know don't have committee meetings. So the ones that do, if there's agenda items on the committee meeting that you have input into, include a response to those in your meeting report. So this will make reports more detailed. It'll make the meetings a lot shorter. So if you've got, you know, on our committee meeting notices, we always put business arising, which means, or ongoing business, I should say. That means stuff that was talked about at the last meeting and we don't know if it's been done yet or resolved. So we'll put that at the top of the meeting notice. If you know that, you know, items 1.1, 1.2, 1.5 have all been dealt with, I would put that in your report. So these items, you know, the quote was approved, the work was done, it all looked great, and we can close that item off. If you put that in your report, it'll show you across everything. It really adds a lot of confidence in the caretaker's knowledge of the site. And also it means at the meeting, we don't need to rediscuss that stuff, and the meetings can be shorter and more focused on what actually needs to happen, what's the new actions coming out of that meeting. Otherwise, if you don't put it in your report and you just say it at the meeting, people will then ask follow-up questions, and you can get involved in a discussion about something that's already done in the past. Always come prepared, have a laptop at all meetings, or if you don't have a laptop, copies of documents printed out, labeled. Guarantee not every committee member has read everything that's been sent to them. So if they say, oh, what was that quote? What was the warranty on that light that you want to put in the garden? If you've got a copy of it in your hand, you can pull it out and answer the question. If you don't have that level of preparation, often things get deferred and they'll ask you follow-up questions. You've got to go away and come back to them by email. Anytime committees say, oh, look, we can't decide that today, why don't you send us an email after the meeting and we'll decide? I just, I shudder at that because it never resolves the issue quickly, and there's usually then 10 more questions that come from the answer to the first question. So the more you can get out of the way at the meeting is best for everybody. Do the reporting up to date. If you've got a meeting on the 28th of the month and you don't send your report till the end of the month, just send it early. And make that as comprehensive as you can. And as I say, you can just say, look, I'm putting my report on the records. Does anyone have any questions? If not, we're going to take that all of that is read and understood. You don't need to rehash everything in there. And having those physical reports is also strategically great for managers, because if the committee ever turns on you and says, look, the manager's hopeless and we want to terminate them, you can then say, look, I can actually send these last 15 reports to owners and say, look, I'm actually doing a really good job. Here's all the evidence. This is where I've asked the committee 7 times for an answer on the maintenance, and you've got proof. If you only come to the meeting and say it, then it becomes a he said, she said, and most owners don't come to meetings and don't read the minutes. So having that record, as much as it probably takes a bit of extra effort, you're building that sort of resume of evidence that you are a comprehensive manager. And an inside tip, when we're doing assignments and we're not sure if a manager's good or not, and the committee wants references, if you can provide your previous meeting reports from a previous site that you've owned or worked at, that cuts down the committee's fear a huge amount. So it's something that's your document. It's not a body corporate record, it's your record, and you can then give it to prospective new committees if you're looking at purchasing other management rights. Okay, provide quotes with your summary, your explanation, at least a week before the meeting. If you've got a big meeting and you give quotes on the night, they're not going to get dealt with because people don't like being put on the spot. So if you've given it a week before, then you can say, look, I gave you these quotes a week ago. Does anyone have any questions? Otherwise, are we ready to vote on them? Review the previous minutes to make sure all your action items are completed, or you can give a substantial update. It's not a good look for us or for you if the committee says, oh, what about that thing we decided at the last meeting? And you've got to flick through the minutes to remember what it was that we agreed to do. So always give those a review. I'd say like 2 weeks to a month before the meeting. So if you did miss something, you can do it, and at the meeting you've already done it. And then focus attention on items that require progressing before the next meeting. So that's sort of for all meetings. If you've got a committee that does not meet regularly, so some committees just have one budget committee meeting each year, or they just meet every now and again, they'll usually be much more reliant on the written reports because they're not meeting to talk about it. The committees that don't meet regularly will much more likely to forget about what they agreed to last time. So that's where you can, you pick it up on your report and tell them what they agreed to, and then tell them that you've done it. And the reason I say they forget, because if at the last meeting 12 months ago they asked you to do something and you did it 3 days later, they've now forgotten about that completely. So you're not going to get any thank yous for something that you did 12 months ago. Whereas if you bring it up and say, oh, by the way, I did complete these actions you assigned to me, it reminds them now that you're doing a good job. So don't forget to do that. And when they do meet, if you know they're not likely to meet again, put more effort into that meeting, get as much stuff approved as you need for the next 12 months so that you don't need to come to them throughout the year. So if you did a big termite inspection work, 2 months ago, and there's a meeting today, it won't be due again for another 10 months, but get it approved now. Get it approved based on the last price, plus or minus 10%, which means when it comes due, you can just get it done and you don't need to come back and wait for the committee to meet again or to decide by email. And the minutes are your instruction sheet. So if you've got committee meeting minutes, when they come out, always read them in a lot of detail. Often the committee meeting minutes we produce, they go to the chair or secretary who might tweak them a little bit, and then they come back. So it might have some instructions in there that you weren't 100% clear on in the actual meeting, or sometimes if the manager had to leave the meeting to go feed their kids or something, and the committee was okay with that, they can still give you jobs to do in the remaining meeting. If you don't look at the minutes in detail, you could miss those. So those minutes are the instruction, and the committee definitely does not need to send you instructions based on each thing separately. The minutes are good enough. Okay, emailing committee, I'd try and treat them like a yes or no answering system. Don't ask them, don't give them 10 colours and say, which one do you like? Because you'll get 10 different answers. Most committees are looking for a solution that's offered to them that they can say yes to. And they expect paid professionals, you and us, in our different areas of work, to give them that solution and say, this is the problem, this is the solution I suggest, do you say yes? So package that up really neatly and deal with as many variables as you can in the original request. And if you try that, you're more likely to get a yes answer. And we try and do this too. If we get a letter from the council and it tells the committee about a problem, technically in our contract, we just need to forward it to them and say nothing. So we could write, dear committee, see attached letter from council, please tell us what you want to do. But they either won't understand it or they don't know what any of the options are. So we don't like doing that. Instead, we prefer to send that to them and say, this is the letter from council. Our understanding is it means X, Y, Z. And then we think the options are A, do nothing, or B, engage a solicitor to, respond or whatever. So, and we've also, if it's engage a solicitor, we've got the quotes and they're, option 1, option 2. So we try and present it as logically and easily as we can, and always give them a recommendation so they can just say yes, rather than saying, I think we should do option A, option B. If you've got a committee that really likes to come up with the solutions themselves, so if they don't like your suggestion, they want to come up with the suggestion and have a lot of discussion and brainstorming, try not to email them at all, because it's really difficult to have brainstorming in an email. If you've got that type of committee, and you'll know you've got this committee if you get a quote for the pool fence and then they come back and say, oh, but we'd like to see, all the different color options. What if it's made out of wood? What if it's made out of steel? What if we make it higher? What if we move it? So if you've got that type of committee that wants you to go back to the contractor with 100 different options, you're going to know about that for the next one. So have that committee discussion before you even get quotes. Bring it forward so that you say, look, this is the project we need to do. I want you to work with me to work out exactly what our preferred scope of work is, so that when we get quotes, they actually align with your expectations. And set up a Teams meeting early on in the process. We don't need to be at those, so if we can't get there for a particular time, don't try and work around our timings. You can just have that chat with committee directly. We generally don't care what you do at the site. We're not involved in it. But if you've got a spending question or something, you could ask us that in advance. So I'd get all the brainstorming out of the way, get your quotes or the proposal, whatever you need, and then say, committee, per our discussion, we agreed we were going to do a grey steel fence and this diameter or length, whatever. And here's the 2 quotes. I've checked them. They both meet the scope, and I recommend contractor A. And that way they've had the opportunity to get their opinions out, but you're still packaging it nicely. This is sort of a list of negatives now. These things are really relationship and trust killers. So I'd like to think if you're on this webinar, working collaboratively with us, that you're not the type of person to get involved in these behaviours. But this is what we see from committees. If any of these things have been done once or twice, often that relationship is just completely dead and can't be revived. So, losing temper, shouting at people, engaging a conflicted or related person for work without disclosing it, using your spending authority for things that are your own cost, if it's either a mistake or a grey area, it doesn't matter. If you make unjustified bullying or harassment claims, obviously if they're genuine, but just because somebody disagrees with you doesn't mean they're harassing. Being too black and white with duties, if there's give and take on all the duties, it needs to be applied really across the board. Forwarding quotes to committees without looking at them, not checking ABNs of contractors, not giving notice to residents, refusing to deal with a committee and only dealing with the strata manager, only assisting clients in your rental pool, or not wanting to talk to non-managed tenants about bylaws, or telling the committee that you're too busy with the rental pool to get your duties done. So this is not something that happens every day, but does happen in the industry. And if any of these occur, it's not that they're individually really terrible, but it's that if you, for example, used your committee spending authority on something that was your cost, they would generally not ever trust you again with any finance decisions. So that type of issue, even if it was an accident, you're not going to get terminated over it, but it will make everything else you do with that committee a lot more difficult. And it's very difficult to get trust back once it's been lost. So these things individually may not seem like a big deal, but I would think about, if you don't get these things right, what are the long-term implications? Does it mean every decision you need to make for the next 5 years will be, 10 times as difficult? And that's really you often don't know about these until you come across them, but those sorts of things are pretty universal. No committee members like any of that stuff on the list. So builders, relationship and trust builders, this is how to make that relationship better, what the committees actually respond to. Go to every committee meeting. Don't ever miss one. If you've got a party or something on that night, just skip it and go to the meeting instead, because it is something people pay a lot of attention to. Prepare accurate and useful reports. Speak up, contribute your ideas openly. Again, I've never had a committee member say that Caretaker's too pushy or too speaks up too much in the meeting. Usually it's the other way around. If you disagree with a committee decision, just tell them, hey, I don't agree with you. I think it's better to replace this thing rather than to repair what's there, and explain your reasons. Don't be afraid that they will come down on you hard for that, because you are a committee member in your own scheme. You can't vote, but you're able to contribute to the discussion, and you're usually the person who knows the most about the topic that they're discussing. So if you stay silent and you disagree with them, and that leads to a bad outcome, it might be a bad outcome for all owners that people regret. So always give an opinion if you have one. Be patient with committee members, and remember they're volunteers who get no training and no pay, and they're probably working a full-time job, and this isn't their primary focus. So a lot of committee members ask the same question more than once, or you sent them a quote and they didn't see it, and so they ask for it again. Don't lose your cool on those committee members, because they can be quite useful to you as allies if you do sort of indulge the need for patience. Compromise and be flexible. That's just a normal thing in business, right? And contribute to the budget discussion. So we prepare the budgets, but we don't actually know really what you want to do in the next 12 months. So our budgeting is very good for things we know about, like contracts and audit fees and that sort of thing. But if you want to, or if you think that the pool needs a major overhaul next year, or the gardens need a lot of mulch or a lot of attention or whatever it is, mention that to us in the budget and mention it to the committee. I think committee, we need to spend $5,000 next year on project X. Can we add that to the budget? Just as a placeholder, and then I'll get quotes later. And particularly for owner-occupier committees, make sure the site looks great. If it means you suggest replacing, upgrading stuff, then suggest it and explain the benefits. The sinking fund's there to be spent on maintenance. So if a complex has 3 or 4 things that people always see and they look bad, it's generally a whole negative reflection on the whole site. So people will equate a dirty or a rusty barbecue with bad management, even though it's not your responsibility often to make that look good. But if you know that people will see it and it's a pain point for them, suggest that they replace it and push your authority on those things that people notice. And tell the committee, the barbecue gets used every day and it's really small, cheap one from Bunnings that the developer put in, but let's get a really good one because it's something people really like to use. You've probably seen this before. This is just a diagram I show to committees and owners to sort of explain who does what. And we illustrate here that the body corporate is all owners. The committee represents them, and the committee's got overlap with 2 of its contractors, body corporate manager on one side, caretaker on the other side. Both of us are equal in terms of our relationship with the body corporate and with owners and with the committee, and we both report directly to the committee. So the committee is the facilitator between body corporate manager, caretaker, and owners, basically. And then I illustrate for committees as well that if this was like a company structure, the owners are like the shareholders, the committee is like the company board or the CEO, and then body corporate manager is like an external accountant, caretaking is like the managers of the business. So the managers report to the board, who is accountable to the shareholders. So that sort of puts it into perspective for people who aren't familiar with body corporate. And that's just information for you, because we do put this out there to committees that you are an important, piece of the puzzle. You're not just some garden contractor who comes and goes. And this is where you don't want to end up. So you don't want to have committees who end up putting you down sort of below the body corporate manager, reporting to us to report to the committee. If committees want that to occur and they say, look, don't email me directly, I want everything to come through the body corporate manager, that's something that I would suggest you push back on. Think about how to do that strategically, but it doesn't make your job any easier. It makes our job a lot harder, and it usually makes the outcome worse if it goes through us to get to the committee each time. You need to have a good working relationship with your own client. And so if that's what they're asking you to do, I think that's a symptom of either a committee that doesn't understand the dynamic at all, or they've got issues with your performance in some area and they're wanting sort of a filter that our office can perform to, improve or adjust what you're putting forward to them. So we don't like this arrangement either. It can be necessary in some cases, but if a committee all of a sudden just asks you to do that, I would be on the phone to those committee members to find out, how they're going and whether they've got any feedback for you, what's sort of going on in the background, because usually this type of arrangement does not mean good things for caretaking contractors in terms of committee. And the other option you don't want is where you're just pushed out completely and left in the dark. So if you're not participating in committee meetings, not invited to the discussion, again, can be a symptom that the committee may not understand that you are a committee member and they need to include you, and they should include you. Some committees they do understand that, but they don't want to include you for strategic reasons of their own. So if it's a lack of understanding and there could be education around it, that can be great, and we're happy to participate in that. If it's an intentional distancing, then I would be looking carefully at what the committee's motivations might be and start speaking with your owners and committee members that you have a good relationship with to try and counteract that before it comes for you. So if you think you're in either of these two positions, I'd be having a deep think about it and probably getting some external advice earlier rather than later, because if you can course correct, the earlier that's done, the better. And I should say committee members rarely back down. So if you've got one of those really dominant committee members who doesn't think the site needs a caretaker and they think it just needs a Jim's mowing contractor, you know, they're probably not right about that, because they wouldn't know what it is that you do. But it's pretty rare that they will just give up. So you're often in for a fairly long-term disagreement with those people, and that might be where a negotiated outcome is advantageous in the long term, you know, for your business interests. But most of these committees aren't in these positions. It's just this is where you might see this, you know, starting to occur. This is the first warning sign. Okay, we've got some Q&A for from attendees rather. So these are some questions that our participants today put in the box when you registered today. So someone's asked, previously we would issue a 12-month invoice for our monthly salary payment. That's totally fine for us, for BCsystems as a business. You usually in your contract, you're required to issue an invoice for each month of your remuneration, but you don't need to send us 12 separate invoices. You can put an invoice that itemizes, you know, January $5,000, February $5,000. So if it has the periods based on your agreement start date and they're clearly itemized, you can just send that once per year, and then we can pay you based on the one annual invoice. But we'll still call it a monthly invoice because it needs to have the amount for each month, because basically every body corporate payment should have an invoice to match up to it. How to deal with owner who believes we're slaves and should be on site 24/7. I think this is an interesting one. Some people are just unable to be resolved or unable to be worked on, but I'd always have a go. So if you had an owner, if you said to this person, do you think I should be on site 24/7? They probably would say, no, of course not, but I really just want you to do the gardens, you know, more regularly, or the pool's always got leaves in it or something. So they often have this thing that they're really passionate about, and the way they deliver that is by just complaining that you're not there enough. So I would go back and say, can you tell me exactly what it is that you have an issue with? Why do you think I'm not doing my job properly, so that I can look at improving? So ask it as an open question. If they come back and say something that you can work on, then work on it, and they probably will come around. If it's something that is just unreasonable or is totally beyond, you know, it's not in your job description at all and it's got nothing to do with you, then that's an education process. But whether you're standing around 24/7 or not doesn't actually change, you know, the outcome of your duty. So usually that's a duties-based complaint that they're just not articulating properly. And if they come back and they're unreasonable, you can put them in the unreasonable camp and just sort of work around them. But I would try and have that opportunity first to turn a difficult complainer into someone who actually does appreciate you. How to go about employing an offsite building manager and what are his duties? So I'm not sure where this question came from, but an offsite building manager versus an onsite building manager, caretaking contractor, whatever you want to call them, the duties are always based on what the site needs. So if you're not sure what your site needs, or if a offsite onsite thing is really important, one of the questions we say hypothetically to committees is it important that the manager's sleeping in their bed? on your site, or is it more important that they're just really across the whole site and, you know, do an excellent job when you ask them to do something? Or do you care, you know, where they put their head on their pillow? So the duties are always based on what the site needs. There are plenty of resources that managers and committees can jointly engage to do a duties schedule, which is done independently and can act as a reset on what the original agreement said. Okay, how do I mow the lawns without a mower supplied by the body corporate? And workplace health and safety won't allow pushing a mower up and down steps to get to the lawn area. If you've got a body corporate that won't supply you with the tools you need, and it's in the agreement that they must do that, then I think the only solution is you have a really frank discussion with them. I can't mow the grass, committee, because the body corporate has to provide the tools, and you haven't given me a lawnmower, you won't approve one. If you've got a spending limit and the asset purchase is within that, then you can usually use your spending power to just buy it yourself. Alternatively, if a committee is actually, you know, if they read that in the agreement, body corporate must provide a lawnmower, and they say no, then I think that committee is just probably being unreasonable about what that contract is delivering. And as a caretaker, if you're a lot owner, you could always go to the owners directly with a motion at the AGM or EGM. If you're not a lot owner in the scheme, you could talk to the owners and ask one of them to put a motion forward to overcome the committee's objection to that. Or alternatively, the body corporate may simply be in breach of the agreement, and if it's really a difficult group, that might be something you get some advice on from a management rights lawyer. Because, you know, in that case, that's probably not the only problem in that site. If all other parts of the body corporate were working well and the committee and the caretaker were working well together, you wouldn't have this happening. So that's probably a symptom of bigger problems. If workplace health and safety won't allow pushing a mower up and down steps, look, there's probably some sort of safe work method statement that allows you to transport mowers. I mean, people transport mowers all the time. So if it means you need to take the handle off and put it on a trolley or do something, then if that's required in order to safely do the work, then it would become a requirement of the body corporate to provide that equipment to you. If it maybe is a two-person lift, so you need to have one person on each side of a mower to lift it safely, then that would probably be your cost to provide that additional labour if your agreement included mowing that particular area. So there's always a solution to, you know, these workplace health and safety problems. It just depends whether it's a labour solution, which is generally the caretaker's responsibility, or if it's a tools-based or a building, you know, change to the building, which usually is a body corporate cost. Body corporate ultimately can't have a contract with you to do something that's impossible. But if it's just difficult, then that's usually not a reason that it can't be done. Okay, what about a water damage claim rejected by the body corporate insurer after investigation states it's a body corporate issue, but committee also refuses? So I'm guessing this is probably damage to an individual lot. If it's damage to the common property and the body corporate refuses to fix it, that may just be within the body corporate's powers. The body corporate doesn't have to make everything perfect. It has to keep things in good condition on the common property. If it's damage to an individual lot that is caused by a body corporate cause, so like a roof leak or something, and the body corporate committee refuses to do it, then the owner of that lot would need to go through their channels to get a resolution. So they could dispute, or they could submit a motion to the committee to fix the ceiling. If the committee said no, they could dispute that decision. They could submit a motion to the AGM to have owners approve the ceiling repair. If owners said no, they could dispute that decision. So if it's something that is unreasonable under the legislation, the owner has to submit motions, and then if the body corporate makes the wrong decision, go through a conciliation process. That's something that you can give advice on, but if the committee doesn't want to hear your advice, I would say let the owner, who's the property, the person with the rights in that scenario would be the owner. Don't take that on too much yourself, because you don't want to end up in a dispute that's not your dispute to have. Smoking in properties and common areas, that nothing's changed yet regarding smoking. There was a decision that smoking is a hazard and can be restricted. We've done a webinar on that, which you can look at on our website. But there is a proposed bill to allow Bodies Corporate to ban smoking in outdoor areas, so like on balconies, but that hasn't come into effect yet. And if and when it does, I'm sure there'll be a million articles about it with all sorts of guides and whatnot. So it's possibly coming, and we think it will be a good thing if it does. What are owners, tenants responsible for maintaining outside their doors? This will depend on the plan of your building. I'd suggest you talk to your individual strata manager about that, or send me a note after the meeting if you want me to look at something for you. Do visitors need a pet dog? Sorry, do visitors with a pet dog need approval from the committee? Yes, if the body corporate has a bylaw saying no pets without approval, then you need to get approval even if the pet's only there for 20 minutes. And that might be a bylaw you look at changing. And is the committee required to provide the caretaker with a safe work environment? This is a difficult one. They're not meant to provide you with an unsafe work environment, but I think, and I'm not a lawyer, but if there was a committee that was refusing to carry out basic safety work, that was their responsibility, then yes, that would be a problem you should take up. If, for example, you had to walk up and down some stairs and they were all rotten and falling apart, and it was a body corporate cost to replace them, and the committee said no, I think that's when you could say, well, look, I can't use these unsafe stairs to do my job, so this is a problem we need to solve. The body corporate committee is not required to provide you with the type of safe work environment that you would expect if you were an employee at a bank, because you are an independent contractor. You might have your own work safety requirements that you need to provide for yourself, which are above and beyond what the body corporate is required to do. And often those safety issues may relate to caretaking duties. So if there's broken glass all over the driveway and that's unsafe, it's probably your duty to clean that up anyway. So having the appropriate protective equipment for work will depend on whether that's in your contract that the body corporate is to provide it or you will provide it. So there's no one rule for that. But if body corporate has failed in its own obligations to make something safe or make something in good condition, then yes, that at the very minimum, they should make good on their obligations there. I've got a couple of questions in the box here. So one, someone said, can you email the report template today? Yes, I can. Got a question, if we as caretaker contract a gardener, can the committee request the contractor's certificates, licenses, and ask what type of chemicals are used and what equipment they are using for chemicals? Does a gardener need an AC/DC license? I actually don't know what an AC/DC license is, to be honest. In your agreement, if you have the ability to delegate, a lot of caretaking agreements don't. They say the caretaking duties must be done by the caretaker or the nominee, or alternatively, if the manager wants to subcontract, the subcontractor needs to be approved by the body corporate. If you've got that clause, then yeah, they can ask lots of questions and definitely can check the suitability of the subcontractor before they approve you to use them. If that's not required in your agreement and you just have free range of delegation, I think it's reasonable that they ask questions. Usually, if they think the work's being done really well, they won't ask the questions. But if you had someone, turn up to do hedging just in a car with a pair of garden or pair of scissors or something, the committee would say, well, who's this person? Do they know what they're doing? Like, that's just normal. So a regular amount of questions, you know, you should be able to have good answers to them anyway. If you're feeling that you can't answer the questions, potentially it's not the right type of subcontractor for you. And it might actually cause damage or some breach of the agreement if that person in fact does not do the duties properly. I think the committee is probably within its rights to ask about what chemicals are being used on the property. And again, should be a fairly straightforward answer. Often agreements have a clause that says the duties have to be done in a way reasonably requested by the committee. So if they said, look, you can't mow the grass with a lawnmower, you need to use kitchen scissors, that would be an unreasonable request. If they say, look, we don't want you to use this super toxic poison, we want you to use a natural alternative, and we're prepared to pay the increased cost of that, that's probably a reasonable request that they would make. So not a clear-cut answer potentially, but depends on what the question is. And if a contractor needs to have a particular license and you're engaging that contractor, it's your obligation to make sure that they have the appropriate licenses for the work. So I don't know what that license is, but I'm not a licensed expert, so you'd need to ask the contractor what license they need and or work that out, you know, using other industry resources. And I think that's the only other question we've had, so might end it there. If anyone has any follow-up on anything that we've talked about today, please feel free to reach out to me directly. Otherwise, we'll send this recording around and you're quite welcome to share it with anybody that you know in the industry if you think they might get some benefit from it. It'll go on our website, so you can come back and have a look if you like, and I'll make sure we send out the slides to the attendees and also that report template that I mentioned to you all. So otherwise, thanks very much for joining, and I'll see you at the next one. Ta.